We're back for another episode, and in the wise words of Jay-Z, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. We're talking financial independence, wealth development, and quality of life. This is Feed Your Finances with hosts Kyler Nichols and Austin Mielczarek. Kyler, what would you say is the main goal of finance?
Broken down, the main goal of finance is to maximize value. What's value, you might ask, Austin?
Well, the way I define value and the way some economists might define value might be a little bit different. I'm a little bit more of a street financier, if you want to put a term on it. But I look at value as gaps in the marketplace. So to give a good example of that, you find a house that's dilapidated that somebody wants $50,000 for, and you can put $25,000 worth of work into that house, and now the house is worth $100,000. You just found a $25,000 value that you carved out just by literally making money.
That's a great way to put it in layman's terms.
Kyler, what's the textbook definition of value?
Value is simply how much someone will pay for an item, service, asset that you or someone else would be able to sell to them.
Now, Kyler, we throw around this term a lot of a personal financial statement. What is the definition of a personal financial statement?
Simply, all it is it's all the things that help you grow wealthier, balanced with all the things that take money out of your pocket. You want to have more things on the left, aka assets, than you have liabilities and having money come out.
Awesome. And I mean, just for a definition of asset, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions. You look at an asset, some people will say, my car is my biggest asset or my house is my biggest asset. I kind of disagree. And if you read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki definitely disagrees. I look at assets as things that make you money. So your primary residence is a little bit cloudy that it could maybe be construed that it could be an asset, but things like a car, I don't necessarily think you think of as more of assets because they're depreciating. Kyler, can you give an explanation of what a depreciating asset is?
Yeah, so it's anything that if you buy now, likely in the future it's going to be worth less. You can buy a stock in the future. You hope that stock grows and increases in value, whereas a lot of people know this. They go buy a brand new car, drive it off the lot, try to sell it the next day, and suddenly it is worth a lot less. Those type of situations are depreciating assets and things you want to avoid.
Yeah, and then so we talk about assets, and then the other side, the bad side, is liabilities. What are some things that would be considered a liability?
So any debt is a liability. So your mortgage, your car payment, student loans, anything else that takes money out of your pocket or that you have to pay to service each month. Those are good examples of liabilities. So obviously one's going to want to have a lot more assets than liabilities, and that difference is your net worth.
Awesome. So if I own two houses and I owe $100,000 each on them, I have total liabilities of $200,000, but each house is worth $150,000. I have total assets of $300,000, so that would make my net worth right around $100,000.
Yeah, pretty easy math there. And when you counter in, maybe I can rent this out, that creates even more value of your house, to where if you did turn one of those houses into a rental, that you probably are worth more than $100,000 when you factor everything in.
Yeah. So we talk about leverage or in liabilities, leverage, debt, whatever you want to call it. Kyler, can you kind of give us a brief definition of what leverage is?
Yeah, so with leverage, all you do is you're borrowing money at one rate and then taking that money and putting it to work somewhere else that is going to return you a much higher rate. So let's say I get a loan at 3% and I invest that in a stock that's going to return 8%. I've just created 5% difference there that you wouldn't have been able to retrieve or get had you not borrowed money in the first place. So yes, there is some risk to it, but when you look at how things historically work out, you're much better doing that or pursuing that route than not.
No, I totally agree with you there. I think, and this is my biggest problem with Dave Ramsey, is that, I mean, I've got a real world example of this right now. I own a house. There are 2 units in that house. It's a duplex. I live in one portion of it. I rent out the other portion of it. And as a result, I've actually borrowed some money from the bank in order, and I've got a mortgage on the property, but I'm then able to rent out that unit and pay that mortgage. So I'm utilizing leverage to actually live for free or very close to free. So that's not even necessarily a gap where I'm spending money to make more money, but I'm actually spending money to reduce what could be a liability for me in order that I could then take that gap and go buy another rental property.
Yeah, and one point I want to touch on with that is you're better off having what people refer to as liquidity, where you don't want to have all your money tied up in an asset that's not very liquid. For example, a home is very illiquid, whereas your bank account, the cash sitting in that, is very liquid. So you want to have a range of things that provide you different scales of liquidity. And one of the worst things you can do is get all of your money tied up in your home, because then you have to come to somebody like me and pay me to get that money out for a cash out refi.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think that is where a lot of investors disagree on debt. Because a lot of things, you know, I get why sorry to pick on you, Dave, but I get why Dave Ramsey doesn't like leverage. And that's because when you're in a very illiquid position, you have millions of dollars of debt out there, and a market turns and you have no liquidity, you have no cash sitting around to make up if something goes wrong. All of a sudden your debtors call all that debt due, and it's a scary time, and it's not a time that you want to be in that position. So having that rainy day or reserve fund is really crucial. If you want to be gangster, you better have something to fall back on.
Yeah, and just one note I want to make is you can look up any public company. Would you consider Apple pretty sound company? Amazon, pretty sound, would you agree? Those are 2 places I think are going to be around for a while. And if you were to pull up their balance sheet, which it's not that different, they're a business, we're individuals, they're going to have debt on there because they can use debt to grow the value of their firm. And at the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do and help you guys do as well.
Yeah, that's a great point.
One thing that people get hung up on about is, for example, what led to the tragedy of 2008 is people were over leveraged. That's really what caused the blow up there. So what you're constantly deciding between is your perfect mix of debt and equity. That's really what you're trying to find in order to optimize your future wealth.
That's great. So I guess the major things that you can take away from this episode here are now understanding what a personal financial statement is, understanding what assets and liabilities are, understanding a little bit of how to utilize leverage, and really what we want to springboard off of this on is getting into how do we get more things in the asset column and less things in the liabilities column so that you can build that gap in your personal financial statement, which is what we call our net worth.